Hello, everyone. It is Misha Green, DC and digital editor, back again today. You probably are tired of seeing my face, but I'm not tired of being with you, especially because this is quite an honor to be interviewing a Shiro, truly of mine, someone who has taught me a lot about honor and integrity and great storytelling. Linsey Davis, welcome to the show. Thank you
Misha,
so much.
it's great to be here with you.
Oh, well, you are very well known, but for the folks out there who might need a reminder, first of all, let me say I told my mom I would tell you hello for her. She loves you. So
Hi,
my
Mom.
mom, Bishop-elect Paula Clark, says hello. But Linsey Davis, all of you all's Emmy Award winning ABC News correspondent, best-selling author, mother, and I think this is my favorite part, proud Christian. And she really is true to herself and in all that she does. And that's really what I admire her. But today we're talking about that part of her title as best-selling author, and I'm venture to say mother as well, because though this fourth Lindsay,
Fourth book.
fourth
Yes.
children's book. But from hearing your background and stories, I know that some of this is really based off of the fact that you're a mom and your dedication to this. And not only will we get to talk about a little bit about your newest book, How High is Heaven, but your trajectory in the game of children's books and being a best-selling author. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. How are you doing?
I'm ever optimistic that we're on our way out. Now, I've felt that way a few times, and to my son, who is 7, going on 8 next month, he's always asked me, when is it going to be over? And I've given many false dates because, early on we thought, oh, well, by the summer it's going to be over and there were all these times, and right before Omicron, I think we thought we were out of the woods. But I'm, I guess, an eternal optimist, and so I guess my biggest concern was my son and how he was going to cope and handle it, because I do think that so much has been lost, for children in their childhoods and everything right now. But he really is, and that is the thing. He, as many children are, they're very resilient, and I hope that he remains as unscathed by all of this as possible. But I'm good, and I thank you for asking that, Misha.
Well, thank you again for your transparency and your willingness to be here and answer that. Now, I know, again, How High is Heaven is number 4 on the list of best-selling books, but I'm curious what got you into the world of children's literature, and now on number 4, what's keeping you there?
Mm. Yes. So I actually set out thinking I was just going to do one, but this is just going to be a one off. But when my son was first born and as a baby, we would read, children's books to him all the time. And after a while, I started thinking, I could do this. And then that became, I need to do this, when I really started looking for books with characters who look like my son, so that he would see himself reflected in the pages of the books that we were reading to him. And that became outside of this month, outside of Black History Month, where the booksellers tend to put all the books on the one table right in front when you come in. At that time, this is going back, about 8 years. It was, I had to be so deliberate and intentional to really find that representation. And then I kind of put on my reporter hat and found at the time the latest numbers, and this has changed for the better, for the more diverse at this point. But at one time, it was that more than 90% of the protagonists in children's books were white. And meanwhile, if you look at the U.S. Census Bureau, more than half of the children in this country are children of color. And so there was really this disconnect. And rather than just, bemoan that fact and complain about it, I figured, let me be a part of the solution, and let me start put on this new hat and become an author. And really, it was just going to be that first book, The World is Awake, a celebration of everyday blessings. And then that book did so well, and it was, people were really had an appetite for diversity in their books and inclusion in books. And so the publisher came back to me and said, do you think you'd want to do another one? And the same thing has happened each time.
Wow.
We're up to 4 with plans for 2 more. So it's exciting. And I enjoy, I consider myself to be a storyteller anyway with my day job, but with doing the news. And this is it's a different variation of being a storyteller, but a storyteller nonetheless, and one that I can kind of be telling the good news and uplifting and positive and joyful about, and really really creative in a way that quite often with the news, it's the murdered and missing and mayhem in the world, and so this was kind of a nice outlet. And especially during the pandemic, I have enjoyed being able to write during this time as well.
So inspiring, and it sounds like quite the journey that was so necessary, but also really fun and didactic along the way. I heard you say that you get to tell the good news, and of course, as Christians know, there's a double entendre in that. And I love How High is Heaven because it's so unapologetic about our relationship with one, the afterlife, but God. And I first am curious, what first of all, tell us about High as Heaven. Let's get there. But also, what gives you sort of the confidence to be so unapologetic and share the good news
Mm.
of Jesus Christ as well in your literature?
So I'll start with the first question first. With How High is Heaven is basically it's based on my own son coming to me one day and after school saying, how come his friend has 2 grandmas and 2 grandpas and he just had one of each. And so we were talking about Grandma P, his grandmother who passed away when he was just 1 and he didn't remember her, and so he wanted to see her. And first I thought he meant, oh, he just wanted to see pictures. So I was getting out pictures of her with him when he was a baby. And then he said, no, I want to go see her. I want to go to heaven and see her. And he, ended up with this kind of preoccupation, I might even call it, for several days and then weeks about how he wanted to go to heaven. And so then we started having the conversation. It was the first time that we had talked about the idea of death and loss. And then fast forward a few months, we were on a plane and he was looking out of the window and he said, I don't see her. And I said, who, you don't see who? And he said, I don't see Grandma P. We're up here in heaven. And I don't see her. And so that was when I said, let me write this book. And so really what I did is, because I think that you have to meet children where they are, right? And so death can be heavy and a really complicated conversation for adults even, because there's so much that we really don't truly know. But for those who believe in God's promise of this heaven being our reward, there is this idea that we are going to be reunited. And the message that I hope that am able to successfully deliver for kids and for parents like is what I observed from my son. The one thing that kind of gave him solace is this idea that he would be reunited with her, that he would see her again. And I think that especially during this time of loss for, COVID, I mean, people are losing lives all the time, of course, but there's just been this intense loss. And in particular for children, we just obviously passed the grim milestone of 900,000, more than 900,000 American lives lost to COVID-19. And there was a journal by pediatrics a few months ago that talked about how 1 in 4 of those deaths, they were the primary caregiver of a young child. And so you have all these children who've really been in a way orphaned by COVID. And so we're talking about more than 200,000 children who over the course of the past 2 years are now growing up without that grandmother, grandfather, mother, father. And I think that especially when you have that intense relationship, that then all of a sudden that person just isn't there anymore, you need to try to kind of have the discussion. So the book is really about my son going in search of this, trying to physically get to this place of heaven. And so the little boy and his sister, the main characters in the book, they try and build a Lego staircase to heaven, or take a pogo stick, or a trampoline, or a spaceship, a hot air balloon, all these physical ways that they try to get to heaven. And ultimately, by the end of the story, the little boy learns that that's not really what it's about, as far as getting to this place called heaven, and that for now he's just going to enjoy heaven here on earth, but he knows ultimately he will see Grandma P. And so I hope that that is an inspiring and a hopeful message, for young kids, and a way for parents to kind of open up the conversation in their own household. Okay, so I think that's the first question. And the second question is, so what makes me so unapologetic? I, from a young age, accepted the Lord into my life, and I couldn't think of a more profound event in my life than that. And so that is something that I hope to instill in my son. And so I do put that kind of message, in some ways. Sometimes it's, I think, very forward looking. There's a real obvious emphasis on religion and spirituality in my books, and in some cases it's very subtle. But for me, because my faith is so much an important part of who I am. There's a scripture that says, "I am not afraid of the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel," and I feel very much that's true for me. And while I think there is a literal and figurative kind of separation of church and state with what I do every day on the news, in my life outside of the news, I feel that it is something that I can share about me, because it is very much a part of who I am. And so that's why I've been able to kind of use the children's books as a vehicle to spread, as you noticed, the good news, kind of the double entendre there.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And I am curious to know how your son feels seeing not only the representation, as you talked about, that's so incredibly necessary, but a few of your conversations and some of his questions coming to life.
Sorry about that. I apologize for that. I was trying
No,
to get rid of something, and it kicked me off for a second.
no worries. No worries. Just reiterating the question, I'm curious to know how your son feels not only seeing the representation that we talked about is so necessary, but also his own questions and you all's conversations reflected in literature.
You know, um, my son, and I think that this is true of any young person who is exposed early on, you don't necessarily need representation until you realize that there's no one else that looks like you, right? If you're exposed at an early age, in all of our books and our toys, and we have a lot of different, our children's book collection has a lot of different colors in there, right? And so I think that because he's exposed in his books and his toys and his real life, his real world experience, we went out of our way to find a very diverse school district and to live in an area where there's a lot of diversity around. And so I don't think that there's ever been a time where he's talked about, in a book, like, oh, that child doesn't look like him, or does, because he sees these mirrors and windows throughout his life, right? He sees the reflections of himself in the pages of the books now that I create, or that we get intentionally, and in his friends, and the other kids that he comes into contact with. I think on a regular basis, he's so exposed that there's never a time that he thinks, well, it's strange that I'm not seeing anybody who looks like me, and I think that's great. I was talking to somebody earlier today who was saying, that I was only the second Black woman at ABC to helm, a major broadcast here. And I was saying that I look forward to the time when we don't have to number anymore. It's so commonplace. And I'm hopeful that that's the kind of environment that my son is growing up in, right? Where you don't have to think about, oh, the first Black president of the United States, because there are many, right? There are several, right? And just like anything else, we don't number all the other people that achieve, because it's so plentiful. And so I think that the same is true with the books. That he kind of is so exposed and used to seeing diversity that it's not even really something that he talks about. And I'm glad. I think that that's really fortunate. And as far as seeing, how high is heaven, he asked early on with the first book, he asked if the little boy was him. And so I said, it's funny because the illustrator, Lucy Fleming, who I love and have been working with for all 4 of the books, and will continue working with her. But in the beginning, she wasn't used to drawing non-white characters. And so she was sending her depictions or illustrations over, and I was thinking, no, all you've done is change the color of the faces, but you haven't changed the hair texture or the features of the facial features. And so I started sending pictures, because there were the father in the first book and the son. So I started sending pictures of my own husband and my own son, not for her to actually make them, in the book, but just to give her ideas of, what people, like an accurate representation of what, the different ethnic, actually how that should translate in a children's illustration. And so so he does think it's neat that even though now the little boy has kind of evolved a little bit with his look, but he still insists that that's him. And I don't try to tell him otherwise. So he does think that that's pretty cool, that he thinks that he's, the star and main character of all the books.
Oh, that's awesome. That's super cool. And I do want to shout out kudos to Lucy Fleming, because oh my gosh, the illustrations are just phenomenal.
Hmm.
So I am so sad that we have to wrap, but I thank you so much for your time. Can you just share with the people how they can purchase How High is Heaven, as well as your other best-selling books?
Oh, yes. Thanks again, Misha, for the opportunity to talk with you. And yes, everyone can buy the books on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you normally get your books. They should have How High is Heaven.
Thank you so much, Linsey Davis, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And again, we thank you so much for your bravery in all ways. But I, for one, really admire your storytelling and work
Thank
as a
you. Thank you.
correspondent.
Thank you.
Thank you.